Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a wonderful show for you this evening. Delphine Tedeski Klaput, one of the real Rosie the Riveters from World War II, is here. We are going to get to hear her story and get transported back in time to understand what happened when our nation mobilized and such wonderful folks such as the Rosie the Riveters went to work to make the war effort possible for so many of us. And so I cannot wait to bring her on board. We are now back, having been at NBAA last week. Hopefully you saw some of the videos and things from that show. It was truly wonderful and very, very cool to see the latest in what is happening in business aviation today. But I am more happy than that to be home and back here with all of you to launch into this show. Before we get started, just a few things. First of all, as we go into fall and into the holidays, things are absolutely booming inside SocialFlight. We have tens of thousands of aviation events and destinations, great places to fly with the fall weather coming on. So all you need to do is get SocialFlight, go to socialflight.com on the web, or get the free SocialFlight mobile app for Apple and Android devices. You'll have access to all of that wonderful stuff, as well as a whole bunch of learning in SocialFlight's FAA Learning Center. And within that center, you can get wings credits for pilot courses. If you're a mechanic or you just want to learn about things that have to do with aircraft mechanic topics, you can take the courses under our aviation maintenance technician programs, or we even have IA renewal courses. If you are an AP mechanic with inspection authorization, you can get your 8 hours of recurrent training directly through SocialFlight, completely free. It's all supported by the folks you see back here on the board, and some new ones that we will be announcing to you shortly as well. And so very, very cool stuff. And then lastly, we have our Fly to Win challenge. We just gave away a Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset to winner Ryan Leeward of Louisville, Texas. He flies a 1947 Stinson 108, and now we are giving away another Delta Zulu headset on December 1st. And so if you want a holiday surprise, you want a chance to win that headset, all you need to do is get the free SocialFlight mobile app and just get out there and you go to the Fly to Win challenge, and within it, you just check in at any airport and you're entered into win. If you keep flying to different airports and visiting different places, you get more points, you get on our leaderboard, you get extra entries. But even one visit gets you entered into win that Lightspeed Delta Zulu headset. So check it out and you may get a holiday surprise. Tonight's broadcast is brought to us by Tempest Aero, and I am very, very excited that they are supporting both SocialFlight and tonight's broadcast, because one of the things I like about Tempest is everything is made in America. It is all made in the USA. And for all of us in the industry that struggled with supply chain issues and quality issues and so many problems during COVID and following all of that, Tempest really came through. They have been here for us the entire time, and a lot of that was because all of their products are made in the United States. And so I just want to say thank you to them. Their oil filters, spark plugs, air filters, and now Tempest fuel pumps are all available. So as a mechanic, I love their products. Be sure to check them out. Now, to tonight's broadcast. Delphine Tedeski Klaput was born on November 23rd, 1924, in the small coal mining town of Cadogan, Pennsylvania. For those of you keeping score, that means that she will turn 100 years young in just a few weeks. We couldn't be more happy for her to be joining us just before that very, very special day. During the war, Delphine worked at the Glen L Martin Company as well as at Western Union, while her husband flew missions as a ball turret gunner on a B-17 in some of the worst fighting over Europe, including missions during D-Day. Delphine's story is one of a nation coming together to support a greater purpose, both overseas and here at home. It's a story of sacrifices, but also about opportunity, as women around the country took on non-traditional roles for the 1940s, helping our nation and enriching themselves in the process. I am absolutely thrilled to have her here with us tonight. Please welcome to SocialFlight Live, Delphine Tedeski Klaput. Hey there.
Hi,
How are you doing tonight, young lady?
I am just wonderful, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here on the show. It is an honor to get this opportunity to kind of go back in time and hear from you about what this was like. And I'd like to start asking you a little bit about what life was like for you just before the war started, so I kind of understand that what that world was before all of a sudden everyone went to work.
Oh, okay, doke. Do you want to know? Well, I lived majority of my time with my grandparents, my grandmother and grandfather. My dad was gassed in the First War, and he spent a lot of time in the hospital. So my mother would go down to where he is at the hospital, and they'd leave with my grandparents. So they practically raised him, even though my mother and dad lived next door. Um,
And
from there, I
and
just,
so, do you remember when what it was like when the war broke out? When you first heard of that?
oh, the first time that the war broke out, I was standing outside of my grandfather's business, and all of a sudden, I'm sorry, people would come out of their business and they were crying and hollering, we're in a war, we're in a war. And I couldn't understand what was going on because I was so protected. And one of the people, one of the gentlemen that knew me came up to me and he put his arms around me and he says, Delphine, we're in a war. And that was about what our life started from being in war business. And I was in high school, and my uncle went to Baltimore to work, and he went down there, and he got himself up to a supervisor. And when he became a supervisor, he asked my mother if I would be interested in quitting school and going down there to work. And when she asked me, I said yes, I was willing to go. I would have been happy to go to help the war effort. I didn't know of anything else at my age or what to do. So I went to Baltimore and I became a clerk in Glen L. Martin, Plant 1, 2. They had two plants. They had Plant 1, 2, and Plant 1. So I went to Plant 1 because my uncle was in Plant 2.
So did you move to live with your uncle at the time? Because you weren't living in Baltimore at the time.
No, I wasn't. I was living in Cadogan. We were living in Cadogan, yeah.
So not
And
only was that a transition for going to work and supporting this, and you were what, 18 at the time?
just about 18, yeah,
17 probably, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But you also had to leave your family then and go live with your
I
uncle in
left
order
my
to do
family,
this.
went down there to work, and they put me, being that I was so tiny, they didn't put me working on the big machines. They put me on as a, well, it was a secretary thing, like, I was in control of 8 men. I worked with 8 men, and I had to make sure each one of those men had a part to work on. They were small parts. I had to get them the part and the blueprint that went with that part. And when they were finished with that part, I had to check them out and take that part to where it was at.
Did
And,
you?
excuse,
No, go
yes,
ahead.
no, that was it. I had to register all that. I walked around the plant. Sometimes I had to have security with me because my job was secured. And I
Is that
had,
because of the blueprints that you had?
that's when I had to pick up blueprints. They would have somebody with me because not all the time, just occasionally. It just depends on what part it was.
Mm.
I would bring that part back to my desk. I would write the serial number down, and then I would take, if one of the men were out of finishing one of his products, when he was done with it, I had to make sure he had something to work with, and I would give it to him. And then when he was done, I had to put that into the records that it was finished and then take it to another department. And then they would go from that department. I never knew where it went to. It
Do
was a
you
little secret.
do you remember your first day at work and what it was like seeing the factory?
Yes, I do. I was very frightened, very scared. I walked in that building and I looked at, oh, it is a big building. But see, when I went in there, I didn't know what my job was going to be. You just went in there, you were hired at the day before. And I went in there and I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to work in them big machines because they were huge. And then they called my name and I went to where the man was standing and he says, follow me. And I followed him and he took me over to this desk. And inside of me, I thought, oh, thank God. It was a nice, easy predicament. But at that time, I didn't know what kind of a job I was working for. I thought, oh boy, I'm just going to be sitting here writing little letters and numbers. No, 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 no. No, I was all over that plant. They would
Wow.
give me a part or they would give me a number. And then I had to find out where that number of the part was and then go get it, bring it back, put it on a form, and the man that was working on it. And then when he was done with it, I would have to write it down that it was done, and then I would take it to a place. It's called parts.
Did you mentioned that in that case you were working with what a man was working on? Were you? I assume there were also quite a few women in the plant.
Oh yes, there was, yes, but there was a lot of men too. It seemed like the men were on the great big, huge parts, and I mean big, about almost the size of a well, I'd say a room
Yeah.
on top of each other. That's how big they were. And that's how big the steel was that they were working on. And mostly the men were working. The elderly men were working on them sizes. The
Hmm.
women were on the machines and inside the planes doing the welding and all that. But that most of that was on the second floor. I was always on the first floor.
Got it. Tell me a little bit about what it was like as far as that transition. For you, it was you were fairly young. For a lot of women, I'd imagine during that time, there was a very big transition to the idea of working and the idea of working in a factory and even the idea of clothing that would be different.
You know, I was very sheltered growing up. So it was a little bit scary for me. I got used to it quick because you didn't have time to think. You did your job, you did your 8 hours, you went home, you ate, you went to bed, and you got up the next morning and did another 8 hours. I worked most of the time 5 hours, but there were days that I did 6 and 7.
Hmm.
Just depends on what kind of a part was in there and how much had to be done.
Hmm.
All kinds of things that the women were doing, all kinds of stuff.
What
And
types
they,
of things can you describe to us?
pardon?
Did you have friends at the plant? What other types of things can you describe that they were doing?
Well, most of them in my area where I worked, they were all small parts and the secretaries and clerks like I was and the blueprints and that was just about it.
It's interesting that you mentioned it's the second floor is where all the other a lot of the other things.
Together. I'm sorry, the planes were put together on the second floor. Now,
Mm.
I wasn't allowed up there, but I got to go up. I wasn't allowed up there, but I got to go up.
And tell me about that.
All right. It's a little bit of a story, if that's okay.
Oh yeah.
Well, I happened to be off of my desk and I was down picking up a part and I came back and one of the bosses in the plant was there And I had to have everything in alphabetical order. So when they came down to see where a part was at, it had to be listed who was working with it and if it was not finished or not. And he had all my work out on the desk. And I looked at him and I yelled, I said, I'm just sick and tired of all you guys coming down here and pulling my work apart. Now I have to work an hour to get it all back. And he said to me, he looked at me very funny and he said, well, what can we do to help you? And I says, get me a board on legs. And that way I'll write the men's names down, the parts that they're doing, and the number. And all you have to do is come out of here and look at it. So they did. They got me the part, and then they sent me to two more apartments to make them.
Wow.
So that made life easier for me and the bosses.
What was life like living with your uncle and kind of seeing things as they happened throughout the war?
I lived with my grandparents and their kids.
Oh, I thought you were living with your uncle during when you were working.
My uncle went to Baltimore to work. I was living with my grandmother and my grandfather. My uncle went down there to get a job. And then when he got a job, he got me down there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I understand your husband, as I mentioned earlier, was a ball turret gunner. Tell me a little bit about him and what he did during the war.
Well, we were just dating when he was in the service. We weren't married yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we got married while he was still in the service. After he finished his missions, he was a ball turret gunner. Him and his brother flew on the same plane. His brother was a tail gunner, and he did 32 missions. He has, and I'm not going to be swearing, but this is what it's called, the Lucky Bastard Club, because he finished all his missions, and that's one of the awards that he got. Yeah, and his brother, they had to sign a waiver when first went into the service that if anybody needed an extra man on a plane, they had to take their place. So my brother-in-law got called on a plane and that plane went down. But my brother-in-law was a prisoner of war. There's a story about that too.
Tell me.
Interesting. When his plane didn't come in, my husband went berserk. And he took after the man that my brother-in-law took his place. He was supposed to be drunk and couldn't fly, so they got my brother-in-law. So when the planes came back and my brother-in-law didn't come back, he went berserk and he was going to shoot him. He had a gun, he went and got his gun and he was going to shoot him. So they put him in jail, and then they sent my husband up to Scotland. And then my husband got over it. He realized that his brother was alive and it was just shut down and he was alive. So he finished his missions, which was 32, and then he came home. And when he came home, we got married. And he went to Denver, Colorado, to Laurie Air Base. And I went back to Baltimore, Maryland to work. And then, about, I'd say 4 months, he finally found a place for me to go to Baltimore. And I quit working in Baltimore and went to Denver to work in Western Union.
Yeah. So before we go to Western Union, I want to ask you, because it's interesting that both he and his brother were gunners on the same aircraft. A ball turret gunner and a tail gunner, extremely dangerous positions.
Yes.
And I always was under the impression that because of like the Sullivan brothers and the Sullivan rule, that siblings did not serve together. What is there a story behind that?
Well, Major Mayor, there were two there. There were two sets of twins in
Yes, and your husband was a twin.
Laurie Air Base 1. There were two sets of twins. I don't know the name of the other set. They were on the ground floor, ground duty, and George and Joe were on it. But they signed a waiver stating that if they ever was needed, they would go. And it happened by a colonel that major helped them and kept them together. That's the only way that happened. It wasn't for the major, they were going to spare them. And then they did one time tried to put Joe on a different airplane, and they had a little bit of a scuffle about it, and Major Mayer, his name was Mayer, Major Mayer, stepped in and kept them together, and they went overseas together.
Wow.
Yep, they went over on Elizabeth.
That is very, very surprising.
Yes, it was. But there was another set of twins, but they were on the ground. They were ground maintenance.
Tell me a little bit more about how life was different when you and the other women were working in the plant. I mean, one of the things that I've certainly heard is that the salaries, the amount of money that someone could make was dramatically different, dramatically more when working for the defense industry.
Well, I never knew of anybody making more than $89 an hour. That's the only thing I ever knew. I know the other girls said that they got a little bit more pay than that, but everybody that was working with me was getting $89 an hour. 89 cents.
89 cents an hour.
I wish it was $89. I took $10 out of my check and sent the rest home to my mom and dad. My dad was injured in the first war. He threw his body on mustard gas. So he had mustard gas, and the government was sending him $50 a month, and he couldn't work because he just coughed a lot. He couldn't work. I was sending, I had a sister, and I was sending my money home to them to take care of my sister. And my brother was sending his money home to them for my sister.
Do you have any like special or favorite kind of like memories of your time working for Glen L Martin and things that you remember about that?
Several, especially when we went to Washington, D.C. to see the cherry blossoms.
Oh, tell me about that.
Yeah, we all got on, 3 of us got on a bus and we went to Washington, D.C. And it wasn't very far. It was a 2-hour drive. And we seen the cherry blossoms just in bloom. Beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. And then we did a couple of outings together. We went to a horse race one time. I lost $2.
That's almost 3 hours.
Yeah. And we went roller skating and little things like that, but we didn't do much. Everybody would go to work, come home, and go to bed.
Yeah. So well, after Glen L Martin, you worked for Western Union, and that gave you a really interesting perspective on being able to see all these communications, because of course telegraph at the time, that's where a lot of messages were coming in. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, there was a lot of sad messages coming in, very sad. But my favorite one was one of the young sailors or soldiers came in, and he gave him the equipment and everything to write his thing out. And he said, I love you, and I love you, and send it to his girlfriend. That was one of my favorites. But I only worked down in that part of the Western Union for about maybe 2.5, 3 weeks at most. They sent me upstairs to send out the telegrams. So they would write them downstairs, and then they would put them in a tube and send them upstairs. And being that I was small and fast on my feet, they transferred me back upstairs. And the telegrams would come in down in a chute, and we had to decipher to find out where in the address books, and they had to find out where that telegram was going to, and then we had to take them over. We were called runners. We would have to take them over to a man that would type it out and send it to either what state or what, either where they were in Denver or if they went to Massachusetts or anything like that. And I worked there, well, I think it was 5 months, and then my husband got transferred to Greenville, Mississippi. And when in Greenville, I didn't work anywhere. We were only there 2 months and the war was over.
Wow. And what was it? Tell me a little bit about what that was like for you and for your friends, kind of being back there first working and then getting the word that things were over and people stopping working, or in many cases.
In Greenville. I was sitting on the PX. There was a big building in the middle of Greenville. Greenville, Mississippi at that time was one street. One street, 2 restaurants, and another couple of stores on the other side, and it took you right straight down the street to the levee. And then I was sitting, like I said, I was sitting out on the porch, this very big porch, and all of a sudden I seen everybody running and waving and clapping, and some man ran up to me. He said, "The war is over, the war is over." So I was in Greenville, Mississippi when the war was over. And then the next day, my husband was discharged. Very next day.
Was he already back by then? Because he'd already completed his mission?
He was, after he came back from England and did his 32 missions, they sent him back to Laurie Airfield for training to go to Japan. And before not Japan, I'm sorry, Guadalcanal. And so instead of going there, they sent him down to Greenville to rest a couple weeks, and then he was supposed to go. Well, we were there a month and a half before the war was over.
Wow.
He never, thank God, he never got shipped down there.
And how did the story end for your brother-in-law that was a prisoner of war?
Oh, he was okay. He was in Germany as a prisoner. He came
How long
out.
was he a prisoner?
How long? I'm sorry.
How long was he a prisoner there?
A year.
Okay.
About a year.
Did he come back before the end of the war or only after the end of the war?
He was back before the war was over. And then he was sent to Florida to be reassigned, and from there, I don't know where he went.
Now, you mentioned Guadalcanal. My understanding is that your brother served there.
My brother.
Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Oh, he had his training in the Great Lakes, and then right from there, they sent him right to Guadalcanal. And his duty was to, when the ships came in and the men were killed, was to take those men in and bring them off the ship. And that was his job. Yeah, my brother never talked about it.
That sounds like it.
We got out of him was that was it.
That sounds like an extremely traumatic job to have.
It was. He would not talk about it.
Wow.
My brother passed away when he was 50, so he wasn't very old. Yeah, but we couldn't get it out of him. We'd ask him a question and he'd just look at it and he'd say, "Don't ask me." Walk away.
Tell me a little bit about how you and your friends handled how it felt during the war to be working and doing all these things, wearing pants, doing all these jobs, and then afterwards.
Well, Cadogan was a very small town, so I had just two really good friends 2 girlfriends, and both of them went into the Army. So I never saw them again. You know, after the war was over, their parents moved out of Cadogan to different countries, different cities. So I never see my best girlfriends again. And then, of course, you know, I got married and I went back to, well, we went back to Cadogan and we had 3 children there. And then from there, my husband was working in the coal mine and we just he got a job here in Michigan and we moved out here 72 years ago. So we've been in Michigan for 72 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So when you look back at that time from starting work at you said about 17 years old,
Yeah.
and going through all those things until the end of the war, what are some of your biggest kind of memories of that time?
Not too many, you know, because we were too busy. You didn't have a good time. I mean, you went home, you went to bed, you went to sleep.
So people just adapted.
Yes, that's all about it was. You just accepted everything that was going on and wishing it was over and everybody was home. And you know, we worried so much about our boys and how they were in families. I don't know if you remember or not, you know, or if you ever seen them, they had flags up in the windows if you had a son in the service. One color was if they're passed away, and other colors if they were still living. They were stars.
I did not know that.
You didn't know that?
I did not know about that.
Remember that. You'd walk somebody by the house, you'd say, oh, they have a soldier in the service, because that was that flag. It was it was blue with a star on it, and then it was on a string, and they'd hang them in their windows. And you'd say, oh, I wish we always walked by them. We'd say, we'd pray for the boy that was in the service. Almost our whole town was in the service.
Yeah. And then what did they do when they lost someone?
Oh, they put a different color.
Mm.
Blue if they were alive, red if they were gone.
Mm.
Just over, just different colors.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to tell you that we have some folks who have parents that also served as Rosies who have been chiming in with their comments. And one person in particular, it's like Michael Lachelle, I'm not pronouncing the name properly, I'm sure, but it's listening because his mother lives with him, worked at Douglas building wings, and so it's pretty cool that we have people that all around that have done things such as what you did, contributing to the war effort, and in this case, you know, working on B-24s and A-26s, and it's just so remarkable how how life changed, and so many people like yourself went to work doing this.
Yes, yes, it's really. Oh, our Rosies are wonderful. They're just wonderful.
Are you still in touch with many folks that are part of the kind of organization and were Rosies?
In Pennsylvania, where I lived, I was the only one that went to work. Everybody there, we had the Pittsburgh, I don't know if you know about the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company.
Tell me.
It was a big glass company that Ford's owned. We built glass for Ford's at the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. So everybody in that town worked at the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. I think I am the only one that ever left. A couple girls went to Washington, D.C. and worked with the government. But I think I'm the only one that ever went into a factory to work that I am aware of, because, you know, it was a very small town.
And you got together recently with quite a few when you went down to Washington, D.C., because you were all awarded Congressional Gold Medal for all of your work during World War II. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, that was such a nice day. We had such a nice day. Yeah. We were honored. We had a big dinner, and each one of us was presented an award in person. It was so much fun. Big day.
Roughly how many people were there and were honored as part of that?
I think 17, 27. 27. Wow. Yeah. It was 27 women. Mm-hmm. All life forms. Mm-hmm. Beautiful day. We got to see a lot of the dignitaries too. The only person we didn't get to see was the president, and he was in the building. But he was busy, really busy that day. A lot of dignitaries in. Yeah.
So how do you think that your experience kind of changed the trajectory of your life? The idea that where you were and when you describe your life before the war, it is very different than a 17-year-old girl getting on a bus or a train to go away and work in a factory.
For me, it was a big change because I was very pampered. My grandparents owned quite a bit of the business in Cadogan, and they pampered me. They watched me. My uncles took, if I wanted to do someplace or go someplace or do something, I always have one of my 3 uncles there to do it for me. So I was really pampered. So you would say I was a spoiled child. So being away like I was very scary for me. Very, very scary. But I didn't do anything, didn't go anywhere except for the last few months that I worked. I don't know if I should tell this or not, but I also ended up in the hospital when I was working at Glen L, Martin. I had an attack appendix. I went to work, and I leaned over my desk, and my boss came up to Mr. Wingo was the name of my boss, and he came up to me and he says, "What's your problem?" I says, "Nothing." And I started doing my alphabetical work to see what I had to do, and I leaned over my desk again, and he says, "Go up to the infirmary." I said, "No." He says, "Oh, you need to go up there. There's something wrong." And I says, "I just got a little pain." He says, "No, you need to go up there." So I went up, and the doctor up there looked at me, and he felt me, and he said, "You're going to the hospital." And I said, "No, I'm not." "You got to go into to the hospital in town." And I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "You have to go to the doctor. If you're not going to go to the hospital, go to the doctor." So Willetta, one of my best girlfriends that I had there, they sent her with me. And when we get to the doctor's in Baltimore, right downtown Baltimore, and the doctor looked at me and he said, he didn't even touch me. He just looked at me and he says, "You're going to the hospital." "No, you're not." I says, "No, I'm not. I'm going downtown. I'm going to get a train and I'm going home." And he says, "No, you're not. You're going to the hospital." So she talked me into going to the hospital, and they took me right up in the operating room, and a nun came in. It was St. John's. A nun came in and she says, "Oh, I hear you want to go home." And I said, "Yes." And she reached down and she touched my side, and oh, I just screamed. And she says, "Are you still going home?" And then the only thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed.
Wow.
So I was off 5 weeks. And in that 5 weeks is when I got married. My husband had finished his 32 missions and came home, and he came on leave, and we got married. And when we were together, when we went to the government had got one of the hotels on the boardwalk for the soldiers when they came, the airmen, when they came back. So we had a honeymoon on the boardwalk for 2 weeks for 25 cents a day, and the 25 cents was for my food. So we were there 2 weeks, and he went to Lori, and I went back to work. And then
Wow.
it was about 4 months that we finally I got to go out where he was.
Did you continue to work for quite a while after the war, or did you stop working?
No, I didn't go back. I didn't go back to work anywhere. I never went to work until I was 72 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
He wouldn't let me work. He told me I was a mother and I was supposed to stay home with my children, and he was supporting me. So I lost my daughter with a brain tumor, and I went to Costco to walk. And when I was in there, some lady came up to me and she was talking to me. And she said to me, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "No, I don't want a job." And she says, "You know, I'd hire you if you would want to work here." And I says, "No, not really." She says, "Why don't you take this application home and see if you would want to?" So I took the application home. I put it on the kitchen table. My husband says to me, "What are you doing with this?" And I says, Peggy gave it to me and said that she wanted me to work for her. And he says, "Fill it out." So I filled it out and took it in and went to work for Costco, and I stayed 17 years. I was 72 years old.
That is hilarious, actually. That's pretty funny. So basically, you went in at 17, came out at about 23, and or 22, and then didn't work until the end. Did you find that was a natural progression for many women during the war, that where they worked during the war and they were very happy and comfortable about shifting to not working and raising families, or were there some of your friends kind of disappointed that they were giving up their jobs?
Well, I didn't have any friends after the war was over because nobody in my town or surrounding town ever left home. They all worked at the Algiers and the Pittsburgh Plate. So none of them ever left. I was the only one that went out. Well, there was a couple other ones, but I didn't know who they were. I was the only one that left town.
But not from the people that you made friends with when you worked at the different jobs?
No.
Wow.
At work at Costco, yeah, I got a lot of friends. I still go to Costco, and they all surround and want to talk, and how I'm doing, was I stayed by myself after my husband passed. That was a nice life. I've had a very, very good life.
Well,
Wonderful.
Delphine, do you have any kind of like parting thoughts for everyone about your story and what that can kind of teach other people in the world?
Not really. If you listen to some of the other girls, though, they really, really have some wonderful stories. I just went back.
We will definitely do that, and certainly reach out. And again, we have some people chiming in whose parents have worked at factories along that. And I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us here on the show and share your story before that big birthday you've got coming up. So you having a party?
I think so.
You look like you're ready for a party.
Working on it. Yep. My daughter's working. Jeanette's working on it.
Excellent.
I told them I didn't want any, but I guess my voice didn't matter.
No. When you're approaching 100, no, you don't get to make the decision whether or not you have a party. Others make that decision.
When I was growing up, people say I'm going to live to this age and I'm going to live to that age. I was told everybody I was only going to live until I was 20. Good many years since I was 20. Yep.
Absolutely.
I feel very fortunate.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your story, and for Jeanette for making this possible, and for the Michigan Rosies. You can look up michiganrosies.org for that organization, and the other organizations that support everyone that did that. Our mission here at SocialFlight Live is to really celebrate and preserve the stories of people like yourself. And so I'm very, very grateful that you've done that, and you've let us get a chance to spend some time with you before your birthday.
Thank you very much for having me. I
You are
appreciate
very welcome. Happy birthday, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving as well.
it. Thank you so much for having me.
Good night, Delphine.
Good night.
And thanks so much to all of you for taking time out of your evening to join us here on Social Flight Live. I really do love these stories and getting to meet so many people that have contributed to our nation and have so many wonderful stories, whether it be in aviation or the military or other aspects throughout history. And it's really wonderful to get to do this, especially leading up to Thanksgiving, which it just seems very, very fitting. And so with that, again, thanks so much to Tempest Aero and everything that they do, Made in America, for supporting us. We are off tomorrow night for election night. Didn't want to compete with that. That is certainly likely to take up everybody's time and interest. And so we will be back on Tuesday, November 12th. We'll be here with our Cockpit to Cowl show with Brian Schiff. We're going to talk about updates on some of the FAA rulings and regulations, as well as maintenance tips for your aircraft, some tips from the cockpit from Brian. If you want to register for that show, you go to Cockpit, the number 2 and the word cowl, cockpit2cowl.com. It'll take you to register for that show. Again, that's next Tuesday, 2 weeks, Tuesday, November 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And then following that, on Tuesday, November 19th, we are back here at Social Flight Live with a special guest. And so really, really looking forward to that. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us this evening. And I wish you all blue skies.